The hall went silent the moment he bit into her cookie. Boone Callahan, the most feared rancher in 3 territories, stood in the middle of Red Hollow's Christmas social, everyone watching as he chewed slowly. Clara Whitmore waited, her face burning with shame, certain he'd spit it out like the others had threatened to do. Instead, his weathered hand reached for another. "This tastes like home," he said, his voice cutting through the cruel laughter that had followed her all evening. He walked out carrying her tin, and the town that destroyed her father learned something important. Sometimes the girl they throw away is exactly the one a dangerous man will kill to protect. If you want to see how far this story will take you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. Let's see how far Clara's journey travels. The snow had started falling 3 hours before the Christmas social began, and Clara Whitmore spent every one of those hours in the kitchen she'd inherited, along with everything else her father left behind: debt, shame, and a collection of recipes nobody wanted. Her hands moved through motions she'd memorized at 8 years old, back when her father still smiled and the town still remembered his name without adding curse words after it. The dough rolled smooth under her palms, flour dusting her cracked knuckles. Outside the kitchen window, Red Hollow dressed itself in holiday cheer. Lanterns hung from storefronts. Families bundled in furs hurried past, carrying wrapped packages. Church bells rang every hour, reminding everyone that Christmas existed to celebrate goodness and mercy and all those beautiful things Clara had stopped believing in around the same time her father drank himself to death. She pressed the elephant-shaped cutter into the dough and lifted it carefully. The shape held. 23 cookies already cooled on the rack beside the stove, each one a perfect miniature elephant with a raised trunk and careful detail work she'd done with a knife tip. Her father called them luck cookies when he still believed luck was something a person could borrow from sugar and butter. "Ridiculous," her stepmother Evelyn's voice came from the doorway. "You're actually taking those to the social?" Clara didn't turn around. She'd learned not to react to Evelyn's tone, which ranged from mild contempt to active hostility depending on how much gin she'd consumed before noon. "Yes. They'll laugh at you." "They already laugh at me." Evelyn crossed the kitchen, her silk dress rustling in a way that announced money. Money from her first husband. Money she'd brought into this house thinking Clara's father had prospects instead of bottles hidden in the barn. "They laugh at both of us, you stupid girl. Everything you do reflects on me. Those ridiculous animal cookies make us look poor." "We are poor." The slap came fast but not unexpected. Clara's cheeks stung, but she kept her hand steady on the cooling rack. The cookies didn't deserve to suffer because Evelyn needed someone to hurt. "Wear the gray dress," Evelyn said. "Not that blue thing you think makes you pretty. And pin your hair properly. You look like a washerwoman." She left in a cloud of expensive perfume that couldn't quite hide the gin underneath. Clara touched her cheek, feeling the heat spread. In 3 hours, she'd walk into that social carrying cookies nobody wanted, wearing a dress that hung wrong on her thin frame, and she'd stand against the wall like always while the town whispered about her father's failures and wondered aloud why someone didn't just ship her off to an asylum for sad girls nobody wanted. But the cookies were done, and they were perfect. And somewhere in this frozen nothing of a town, maybe one person would taste them and remember that her father had been good at something once. Parmoshin. The Red Hollow Christmas social happened every year in the town hall, which someone had decorated with pine garlands and red ribbon that looked elegant in the lamplight. Clara arrived exactly when Evelyn told her to arrive, not early enough to seem eager, not late enough to draw attention. The gray dress made her disappear into the walls. Her hair pulled back so tight it gave her a headache. The tin of elephant cookies felt heavy in her hands. Women in velvet and fur clustered near the refreshment tables, admiring 3-tier cakes decorated with spun sugar and candied flowers. Mrs. Patricia Thornhill held court in the center, her diamond earrings catching light every time she turned her head to accept another compliment. She'd won the baking competition 4 years running. Her gingerbread house this year featured actual stained glass windows made from melted hard candy. Clara found a spot near the back wall and set her tin down on the far end of the dessert table, between a plate of sugar cookies shaped like stars and something elaborate involving chocolate and raspberry that smelled like it cost more than Clara's rent. "Oh my goodness, what are those?" The voice belonged to Anna Breslin, 6 years old, with blonde ringlets and a face that hadn't learned cruelty yet. She'd escaped her mother's supervision and now stood on tiptoe trying to see into Clara's tin. "Elephants," Clara said softly. "Would you like one?" Anna's eyes went wide. "Can I really?" "They're for everyone." The little girl took one carefully, holding it in both palms like something precious. She bit into it, and her whole face transformed into pure joy. "Mama, Mama, come taste!" That's when everything went wrong. Anna's mother, Mrs. Cordelia Breslin, wife to the bank manager, came sweeping over with the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "Anna, darling, we don't eat strange things at parties." "But Mama, it's an elephant." "Put it down." Anna's face crumpled, but she obeyed, setting the half-eaten cookie back in the tin with the care of a child who'd learned that arguing with Mama led nowhere good. Mrs. Breslin took her daughter's hand and guided her firmly away, but not before glancing back at Clara with the expression usually reserved for dog shit on expensive shoes. The moment passed. The party continued. Clara stood beside her cookies and watched families laugh and children play and men drink punch while discussing cattle prices and railroad expansion. Nobody approached the dessert table's far end. When people reached for sweets, they carefully avoided the tin with the elephants, as if poverty might be contagious through baked goods. An hour passed, then 2. Clara was debating whether leaving early would cause less gossip than staying when Patricia Thornhill's voice cut through the conversation like a knife through cake. "Well, I think we should address it directly." The hall didn't go fully silent, but enough conversations paused that Clara knew, she absolutely knew, what was coming next. Patricia approached the dessert table with 4 other women flanking her like generals behind a queen. She picked up Clara's tin, examined it with theatrical curiosity, and then smiled that smile rich women use when they're about to destroy you in public. "Clara Whitmore. How creative." The words dripped with poisoned honey. Every eye in the hall turned their direction. Clara felt her throat close up. "Thank you," she managed. "Elephants." Patricia turned the tin so everyone could see. "At Christmas! How unusual." "My father used to make them," Clara said. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "For luck." "Your father?" Patricia's smile sharpened. "Yes, we all remember your father's luck, don't we? Particularly that luck he found at the bottom of whiskey bottles." Someone in the crowd snickered. Clara's face went hot. "These are just cookies," she said quietly. "Just cookies," Patricia repeated. She opened the tin and took one out, holding it up to the light like a jeweler examining a flawed diamond. "Made by a girl whose father died drunk and in debt, whose stepmother tolerates her out of Christian charity, who spends her days in that sad little house making elephant cookies. For Christmas." The humiliation burned through Clara's chest. She wanted to grab the tin and run. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to cry, but crying would make it worse because these women fed on tears, like wolves fed on weakness. "I think," Patricia continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "that we should maintain certain standards at our social. This is a celebration of refinement and community values, not a charity event for every unfortunate girl who thinks baking can compensate for bad breeding." She turned toward the trash bin. Clara's hand shot out before her brain caught up. "Please don't." "Don't?" Patricia's eyebrows rose. "Don't throw away these pathetic little animals that nobody wants? Why ever not?" "Because my father," Clara's voice broke. She hated herself for it. "Those were his. The recipes. They're all I have left of him." "How touching," Patricia said. The cruelty in her voice could cut glass. "Unfortunately, sentiment doesn't make up for poor judgment. You should have stayed home, Clara. This event isn't for girls like you." She dropped the elephant cookie into the trash. The sound it made hitting the bottom of that bin was the smallest, most devastating sound Clara had ever heard. Something in her chest cracked. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of these women who'd been waiting years for her to finally break. Then a voice came from the back of the hall, deep, rough, carrying the kind of authority that made people step aside without thinking about it. "I'll take one." Every head turned. Boone Callahan stood in the doorway like a storm that had decided to take human shape. 6'3" of weathered muscle and hard-earned scars, wearing work clothes to a fancy party because he'd probably come straight from the ranch. Snow dusted his shoulders. His boots left melting tracks across the polished floor. And his eyes, pale gray, cold as January, fixed on Patricia Thornhill with the intensity of a man deciding whether you were worth the bullet. The entire hall held its breath. Boone crossed the room in 5 strides, people partying like water around stone. He stopped in front of the dessert table, looked down at Clara's tin of elephant cookies, and picked one up between his scarred, work-roughened fingers. Patricia recovered first. "Mr. Callahan, I don't think—" "Wasn't asking your opinion, Patricia." He bit into the cookie, chewed slowly. The hall watched him the way rabbits watch hawks circling overhead, frozen, terrified, unable to look away. Clara couldn't breathe. She'd seen Boone Callahan maybe 3 times in her entire life, always from a distance, always with the kind of reputation that preceded him like thunder before lightning. He owned the biggest cattle ranch in 3 territories. He'd killed 2 men in a property dispute 5 years back, legal shooting, but still. He came to town maybe twice a year, bought what he needed, and left without making conversation. People said he was mean. People said he was dangerous. People said a lot of things about Boone Callahan, but nobody ever said those things to his face. He took another bite of the elephant cookie. Then he looked directly at Clara, and his expression did something she didn't expect. It softened, just barely, just enough. "This tastes like home," he said quietly. The hall stayed silent. Patricia Thornhill's mouth hung open. Mrs. Breslin clutched her daughter's hand. Even the children stopped moving, sensing that something important was happening, even if they didn't understand what. Boone reached into the tin and took 3 more cookies. "How much for the rest?" Clara's brain stopped working. What? The rest of these? How much?" They're not for sale. They're for the social." "Social don't want them." He nodded toward the trash where Patricia had thrown the first one. "You want them back in that bin, or you want them going somewhere they'll be appreciated?" Clara looked at the tin, at the cookies her father taught her to make when she was small, and he was sober, and the world seemed like a place where good things could happen to people who deserved them. At these elephants she'd shaped carefully, each one perfect, each one carrying a memory of a man who'd loved her before whiskey loved him more. "Take them," she whispered. "Please." Boone picked up the entire tin. He looked at Patricia, at the women clustered around her, at the whole hall full of people who'd just watched them humiliate a girl for having the audacity to bake cookies. "Y'all should be ashamed," he said simply. Then he turned and walked out, carrying Clara's elephants with him, snow blowing in through the open door before it swung shut behind him. For 5 full seconds, nobody moved. Then Patricia Thornhill laughed, a high, brittle sound that shattered the moment. "Well, how extraordinary. I suppose even rough men have peculiar tastes." The spell broke. Conversations resumed. The party continued. People drifted back to the punch bowl and the respectable desserts in their comfortable worlds where girls like Clara knew their place and stayed in it. Clara stood alone beside the dessert table, her tin gone, her father's cookies carried off by a man everyone feared, and something warm was growing in her chest. Not happiness exactly, but something close to hope. The dangerous kind of hope that makes you think maybe the world isn't finished breaking your heart. She didn't know it yet, but Boone Callahan had just changed both their lives forever. And Red Hollow, the town that threw her away, would learn exactly how much that cost. Clara left the social 40 minutes later, after Evelyn found her standing alone and hissed that she'd embarrassed them enough for one evening. The walk home took 15 minutes through snow that had started falling harder, fat flakes that caught in her hair and melted against her burning cheeks. The house waited dark and cold. Evelyn had gone to the Thornhills after-party, an exclusive gathering for Red Hollow's finest families, naturally not including Clara. The silence pressed against her ears as she lit a lamp and climbed the stairs to her small room under the eaves. She didn't cry. She'd learned years ago that crying alone was worse than crying in front of people because at least public tears ended. Private ones could go on forever. Instead, she sat on her bed and tried to understand what had happened. Boone Callahan had defended her. No, defended wasn't the right word. He'd claimed her cookies like they mattered, like she mattered. He'd looked at her with those pale gray eyes and said 5 words that rattled around in her head now, like coins in an empty tin. "This tastes like home." What did that mean? What home? The rancher everyone whispered about, The man who'd shot 2 people and never apologized. What kind of home did he have that tasted like her father's elephant cookies? Sleep didn't come easy. When it finally did, Clara dreamed of snow and cookies and a man with gray eyes who picked her up out of the trash and carried her somewhere warm. She woke to shouting. Dawn light crept through her window, pale and thin. Downstairs, Evelyn's voice rose in pitch and fury, each word sharp enough to cut. Absolute humiliation. Do you understand what you've done? Patricia Thornhill won't speak to me? Cordelia Breslin actually crossed the street to avoid me at the market. Clara's stomach dropped. She pulled on her dress from yesterday, the gray one, and crept halfway down the stairs. Evelyn stood in the parlor, still wearing her party clothes from last night, her hair falling out of its pins. Her face was red and blotchy. She'd been crying, which meant the Thornhills' party had gone very badly. The entire town is laughing at us, Evelyn continued, pacing like a caged animal. That scene yesterday, you and those ridiculous cookies, and then Boone Callahan making a spectacle of the whole thing. Do you know what people are saying? Clara descended another step. It wasn't my fault. Evelyn spun on her. Not your fault? You brought those pathetic elephants to a respectable event. You made us look poor and desperate, and... She stopped, breathing hard. I should have married the railroad man in Denver. I should have left when your father died. But no, I stayed. I tolerated you out of duty, and this is how you repay me, by making me a laughingstock. I just wanted to contribute something, Clara said quietly, to be part of the celebration. You're not part of anything, Evelyn's voice cracked. You're a reminder of everything wrong with this family, your father's debts, his drinking, his failures, and now you've attached yourself to the town's worst gossip like a barnacle to a sinking ship. What gossip? Evelyn laughed, and it sounded slightly unhinged. Boone Callahan defending you, taking your cookies, looking at you like... She stopped, shook her head. People are talking, Clara, about why a man like that would notice a girl like you, about what that means, about what you might have done to attract his attention. The accusation hung in the air like poisoned gas. Clara's hands clenched. I didn't do anything. It doesn't matter what you did or didn't do. It matters what people think. And right now they think you're the kind of girl who catches the eye of dangerous men through shameful means. That's not... He just liked the cookies. Nobody cares about the cookies, Evelyn screamed. Then quieter, deadlier. Get out! Clara blinked. What? Get out. Evelyn pointed at the door. I've spent 4 years trying to salvage this family's reputation. I will not let you destroy what little standing I have left. Pack your things and leave. It's Christmas Day. I don't care if it's Easter Sunday. You've made your choice. You want to be the girl who bakes strange cookies and attracts rough men and embarrasses respectable people? Fine, do it somewhere else. The room tilted. Clara grabbed the banister. You can't throw me out. This is my house. Your father left nothing but debt, which I paid. This house belongs to me now, legally, completely. And I want you gone before noon. She meant it. Clara could see it in her stepmother's eyes. The cold calculation of a woman who'd decided that survival meant cutting loose the dead weight. And Clara, with her sad cookies and her poor judgment and her complete inability to understand how the world worked, was definitely dead weight. Where am I supposed to go? Clara whispered. Not my problem. Evelyn turned away, adjusting her hair in the hall mirror. You should have thought about that before you made a fool of both of us. 2 hours later, Clara stood in the snow outside her father's house, Evelyn's house now, with everything she owned packed into a single carpet bag. The recipes, 2 dresses, her mother's hairbrush, a photograph of her father from before the drinking when his eyes still held light, some undergarments, a coat that wasn't quite warm enough for Christmas Day in Red Hollow. The door had locked behind her with a sound like finality. Main Street stretched out ahead, decorated for a holiday Clara was no longer celebrating. Families walked past carrying presents and laughing, their breath steaming in the frozen air. Shop windows glowed warm. Church bells rang, calling people to Christmas service. Clara walked. She didn't know where she was walking to. Just away. Away from Evelyn's house and Patricia Thornhill's cruelty and the whispers that would follow her now wherever she went in this town. Her hands had gone numb inside her thin gloves. Her feet ached. She'd been walking for maybe an hour when she realized she'd reached the edge of Red Hollow, where the buildings gave way to open frontier and the road became just frozen ruts cutting through endless snow. She stopped, turned around. Red Hollow looked almost beautiful from a distance, with its church steeples and lamp-lit windows and smoke rising from chimneys where families gathered around fires. A postcard-perfect town full of people who'd decided she didn't belong. The cold was settling into her bones now. She needed shelter, needed warmth, needed... You planning to freeze to death out here, or you got an actual destination in mind? Clara spun. Boone Callahan sat on horseback maybe 20 feet away, like he'd materialized out of the snow itself. He wore a heavy coat and wide-brimmed hat, both dusted with white. His horse, a massive gray gelding, stood patient and still. Claire's voice came out shaky. I'm just walking. In a straight line away from town on Christmas Day with everything you own in that bag. His pale eyes narrowed. That's not walking. That's running. I'm not running from anything. Everybody's running from something. He tilted his head, studying her. Your stepmother throw you out? Clara's throat tightened. She nodded. Boone was quiet for a moment. Then, you got anywhere to go? Not yet. Not yet. He repeated it like he was tasting the words, finding them bitter. Meaning, no. The wind picked up, cutting through Clara's coat. She shivered. Boone noticed. Of course he noticed. Men like him noticed everything because not noticing got you killed in whatever dangerous world he inhabited. He swung down from his horse with the easy grace of someone who'd spent more time in saddles than in chairs. Up close, he was even more intimidating. All hard edges and old scars and eyes that had seen violence and decided it was just another part of Tuesday. I got a proposition for you, he said. Clara took a step back. Easy. He held up one hand. Not that kind of proposition. I need a cook at my ranch. Lost my last one 3 weeks back when he decided Montana looked better than Colorado Territory. Been feeding my hands hardtack and beans ever since. They're starting to look mutinous. Clara stared at him. You want to hire me? You can cook, can't you? Those elephant cookies were the best thing I've tasted in 5 years. I can cook, Clara admitted, but I've never worked on a ranch. I don't know anything about cattle or... Don't need you to know cattle. Got 12 men who know cattle. Need you to know food. He pulled a worn leather glove off and extended his hand. 3 meals a day for 12 hands plus me, room and board included. $40 a month. $40. Clara made maybe $10 a month doing laundry and mending for town families. $40 was impossible. Suspicious. Too good. Why? She asked. Why what? Why would you offer me this? You don't know me. I could be a terrible cook. I could steal from you. You won't. How do you know? Boone looked at her for a long moment. Because you made those cookies for a town that hates you, and you made them perfect anyway. Because you didn't cry when Patricia Thornhill threw them in the trash, even though I saw you wanting to. Because you're standing out here in the snow with nowhere to go, and you're still asking questions instead of just saying yes. He paused. That tells me what I need to know about your character. The wind howled. Clara's fingers had lost all feeling. Her toes weren't far behind. She looked back at Red Hollow one more time, at the town that birthed her and broke her, and finally threw her away like garbage. Then she looked at Boone Callahan, at this dangerous man everyone feared, offering her $40 and a place to sleep and the chance to cook for people who might actually want to eat what she made. It wasn't a choice. Not really. Okay, she said. Boone nodded once, like he'd expected nothing less. He turned back to his horse, pulled himself into the saddle, then extended his hand down to her. Give me the bag. You're riding behind. Clara handed up her carpet bag and let him pull her up onto the horse's back. She'd never ridden before, never been this close to an animal this large. Her hands gripped Boone's coat without thinking, holding on as the world suddenly became very tall and unstable. Hang on, he said. Ranch is 2 hours out. Gets rough after the first mile. Then he kicked the horse forward, and Clara Whitmore left Red Hollow behind. The town that mocked her father, the town that humiliated her, the town that threw her into the snow on Christmas Day and expected her to die quietly. She didn't look back again. The ride was exactly as rough as Boone promised. They left the road after 30 minutes, cutting across open country where the snow lay thick and trackless. Wind screamed across the plains. Claire's face went numb. Her hands ached from gripping Boone's coat. The horse climbed hills and splashed through half-frozen creeks and pushed through drifts that came up to its chest. Boone didn't speak. Clara didn't either. There was nothing to say, and the wind would have stolen the words anyway. She started to understand slowly the kind of isolation Boone lived in. This wasn't the frontier. This was beyond the frontier. This was the raw edge of civilization, where towns ended and emptiness began. Nothing out here but snow and sky, and the kind of silence that made you understand how small you were. Just when Clara thought she might actually freeze to death on horseback, buildings appeared in the distance. The ranch sprawled across a valley between two low hills, protected from the worst of the wind. A main house, 2 stories, solid timber. A barn that looked like it could survive the apocalypse. Bunkhouse, storage sheds, corrals where horses stood with their backs to the weather. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, promising heat. 3 men emerged from the barn as they rode up, all of them dressed in heavy coats and wearing expressions that ranged from curious to suspicious. Boone dismounted and helped Clara down. Her legs nearly buckled. 2 hours on horseback after a lifetime of walking had destroyed muscles she didn't know she had. "This is Clara Whitmore," Boone announced to the men. "She'll be cooking starting tomorrow. Anyone gives her trouble answers to me. Clear?" The 3 men nodded quickly. One of them, a young guy maybe 20 years old with a friendly face, stepped forward and tipped his hat. "Ma'am, I'm Jimmy. That's Hank and Pete. Welcome to Callahan Ranch." "Thank you," Clara managed through numb lips. Boone grabbed her carpet bag and started toward the main house. "You'll take the spare room upstairs. Kitchen's through the back. Hands eat at 6, noon, and 6. Breakfast is simple. Dinner, they expect something that tastes like food. You need supplies, tell me. You need help with anything, ask Jimmy. He's the only one with manners." He opened the door and heat rushed out, so wonderful Clara almost cried. The inside of the house matched the outside. Solid, practical, built by someone who valued function over beauty. Timber walls, stone fireplace currently roaring, furniture that looked handmade and worn comfortable. Everything clean but spare. A bachelor's home, clearly, but not neglected. Boone led her upstairs to a room that held a bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window overlooking the valley. Simple. Plain. The nicest room Clara had lived in since her mother died. "Bedding's in the chest," Boone said, setting her bag down. "Water pump's in the kitchen. Outhouse is behind the barn, but there's a chamber pot under the bed for night. You need anything else?" Clara shook her head. She couldn't speak. The warmth was making her fingers sting as feeling returned. Her face throbbed. Boone studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said quietly, "You did the right thing, taking this job. That town would have killed you slowly. Out here, at least you got a fighting chance." He left before Clara could respond. She sat on the bed, her bed now, and listened to his boots descend the stairs. Listened to the wind outside and the fire crackling below. Listened to men's voices drifting from the bunkhouse, talking about God knew what. For the first time in 4 years, Clara Whitmore was somewhere nobody expected her to fail. The tears came then. Not sad ones. Not exactly happy ones either, just tears, releasing something she'd been holding too long. Tomorrow she'd start cooking for 13 men. Tomorrow she'd figure out this strange new life. Tomorrow she'd become whoever Clara Whitmore needed to be to survive in this harsh, frozen, beautiful place. But tonight, Christmas night, she was just a girl in a warm room with a locked door and the first real peace she'd felt since her father forgot how to love her more than whiskey. Outside, the snow fell. Inside, Clara slept. And somewhere in the darkness, Boone Callahan sat alone in his study, eating the last elephant cookie, wondering what the hell he'd just brought into his carefully controlled world. Neither of them knew yet that Red Hollow wouldn't let her go quietly. Neither of them knew the town's cruelty had just begun. But they'd find out soon enough. Some towns don't forgive girls for surviving, and some men don't forgive towns for trying to kill them. Clara woke to darkness and the smell of coffee brewing somewhere below. For 3 confused seconds, she didn't remember where she was. Then it came back. Evelyn's house, the snow, Boone Callahan on horseback, the ranch house with its spare room and the promise of $40 a month. She sat up too fast and her body screamed in protest. Every muscle ached from yesterday's ride. Her hands were stiff. Her face felt raw from windburn. The clock on the dresser read 4:30 in the morning. Downstairs, boots thumped across wooden floors. Men's voices rumbled, low and rough with sleep. The ranch was waking up, and Clara had exactly 90 minutes to figure out how to cook breakfast for 13 people using a kitchen she'd never seen and supplies she didn't know existed. She dressed quickly in the cold room, fumbling with buttons her frozen fingers couldn't quite manage. The blue dress this time, not the gray one Evelyn had demanded. That felt like a small victory. Her hair went up in a simple knot. No mirror to check her reflection, but it probably didn't matter. The men working this ranch weren't looking for beauty. They were looking for food that didn't taste like saddle leather. The kitchen waited at the back of the house, larger than she'd expected and surprisingly well organized. Cast iron stove already heating, someone had loaded it with wood before she woke. Pantry shelves stocked with basics: flour, sugar, salt, dried beans, cured meats hanging from hooks. Root cellar door stood open, showing potatoes, onions, carrots, turnips. A whole side of bacon waited on the counter, probably brought up from the smokehouse. Clara stood in the center of the kitchen and felt her breathing slow. This she understood. This she could do. She found eggs in a basket, 2 dozen, still cold from wherever they'd been stored. Coffee was already made, the pot sitting on the stove keeping warm. Someone had thought ahead, which meant the hands were used to fending for themselves and probably had low expectations. Good. Low expectations were easier to exceed. She started with biscuits because biscuits were fast and filling, and men always ate them regardless of quality. Her hands fell into familiar rhythms: flour, lard, buttermilk, salt, baking powder. The dough came together smooth and she cut it quick, getting 2 dozen rounds onto a baking sheet and into the oven before moving to the bacon. The meat sizzled when it hit the pan, filling the kitchen with smoke and the kind of smell that made empty stomachs growl. She just cracked the first egg when the back door opened and Jimmy stuck his head in. "Morning, ma'am. Just checking if you needed—" He stopped, sniffing the air. "Is that bacon?" "And biscuits, eggs in about 10 minutes. How do the men like them?" "However you're willing to make them," Jimmy grinned. "We've been eating our own cooking for 3 weeks. Pete tried to make pancakes last Tuesday, and we almost lost a tooth." Clara cracked another egg into the pan. "How many hands total?" 12 plus the boss. But Big Jim's out riding fence lines. Won't be back till noon. And Hank don't eat breakfast, just drinks coffee till he's human. So you're cooking for 11 this morning. 11. Okay. She could do 11. She'd done bigger meals when her father still hosted poker games, back before the drinking got bad. "They eat in here or the bunkhouse?" "Here, if that's all right. Boss has a long table in the dining room. We usually just grab whatever's available and eat standing up. But if you're doing a proper meal, set the table," Clara said. "If I'm cooking, we're eating like people, not animals." Jimmy's grin widened. "Yes, ma'am. I'll tell the boys." He disappeared. Clara heard him shouting to the others, his voice carrying across the yard. She flipped the bacon, checked the biscuits, golden brown, perfect, and started cracking eggs in earnest. Scrambled would be fastest. She could do scrambled for 11 in 2 batches, keep the first batch warm while the second cooked. The biscuits came out exactly right. She split them, buttered them while they steamed, and piled them on a platter. Bacon went onto another plate, enough to feed a small army. Eggs scrambled with a splash of cream she found in the cold box, seasoned with salt and pepper and a pinch of dried herbs from the shelf. By the time Boots started tromping through the front door, Clara had the dining table set with mismatched plates and bent forks, and steaming platters of food that smelled like someone actually cared whether these men lived or died. They filed in slowly, cautiously, like soldiers entering potentially hostile territory. Jimmy first, then Pete, a wiry man in his 40s with a face like old leather. Then came a parade of others whose names Clara didn't catch, all of them wearing the same expression of suspicious hope. Boone came last, his hair still wet like he'd dunked his head in the water trough. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the set table and the food, and Clara standing beside it all like she'd conjured breakfast from thin air. "Sit," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Before it gets cold." They sat. For about 5 seconds, nobody moved. Then Jimmy grabbed a biscuit and the dam broke. Hands reached for plates. Food disappeared faster than Clara had thought possible. The sound of eating filled the room, forks scraping, men chewing, the occasional grunt of satisfaction. Pete bit into a biscuit and his eyes closed. Sweet mercy. Language, Boone said mildly, but he was working on his third piece of bacon and showed no signs of slowing. Clara stood against the wall, watching them eat. It felt strange. Good strange. These men weren't making conversation or offering compliments. They were just eating like the food mattered, like it was fuel and comfort and proof that someone gave half a damn whether they survived the winter. When the last biscuit disappeared and the platters sat empty, a heavy silence settled. Then Pete pushed back from the table and looked directly at Clara. "Ma'am, I don't know what the boss is paying you, but it ain't enough." Several men grunted agreement. Jimmy nodded so hard his hat nearly fell off. Boone stood, collecting his plate. "Clara's getting $40 a month plus room and board. Anyone thinks that's unfair is welcome to cook tomorrow's breakfast themselves." That shut everyone up. $40 was ranch foreman money. For a cook, it was unheard of. Clara felt heat rise in her face, but she kept her expression neutral. The men cleared out slowly, each one nodding thanks as they passed. Jimmy lingered at the door. "That was the best meal I've had since my mama died," he said quietly. "Just wanted you to know." Then he was gone, and Clara was alone with a table full of dirty dishes and a kitchen that smelled like success. She was elbow-deep in dishwater when Boone reappeared. He didn't say anything, just picked up a towel and started drying the plates she'd washed. They worked in silence for several minutes before Clara found her voice. "You didn't have to offer $40. "Didn't have to offer anything, but good cooking's worth paying for." "The town will talk when they find out." "Town's already talking." Boone set a dry plate on the stack. "Might as well give them something real to discuss." Clara scrubbed at a stubborn bit of egg. "What are they saying?" "That you're living in sin on my ranch, that I've ruined you, that you're either my mistress or so desperate for shelter you'd do anything to stay." He said it matter-of-factly, like reporting the weather. Standard nonsense from people with too much time and not enough real problems. "Doesn't it bother you?" "No." "Why not?" Boone was quiet for a moment, drying the same plate twice. "Because I stopped caring what Red Hollow thought about me the day they decided my business was their entertainment. Town wants to gossip? Let them. Won't change anything out here." Clara handed him the last plate. "Your hands don't seem bothered by me being here." "My hands care about 3 things. Fair pay, decent food, and whether their boss will back them in a fight. You're providing one of those things better than anyone has in years. That buys loyalty faster than any reputation." The dishes done, Boone hung the towel and turned to face her. "You did good this morning, but breakfast is the easy meal. Dinner's when you'll prove whether this arrangement works." "What do they usually eat?" "Beans, salt pork, hardtack. Sometimes stew if whoever's cooking feels ambitious." He paused. "I've got a smokehouse full of venison and a cold storage with beef. Use what you need. These men work 16-hour days in weather that kills. They deserve food that doesn't taste like punishment." Then he left, and Clara was alone again with a kitchen that was starting to feel less strange and more like possibility. The morning passed in a blur of learning where things lived and what supplies existed. The pantry held more than she'd initially seen: dried fruit, molasses, real vanilla, spices she hadn't expected this far from civilization. Someone had stocked this kitchen for serious cooking, probably years ago, and most of it sat unused because the men didn't know what to do with anything more complicated than beans. By noon, Clara had bread dough rising and a plan forming. For dinner, she'd make something that tasted like home, wherever home was for men who lived this far from everything. Big Jim appeared around 12:30, a mountain of a man who had to duck through doorways. He stopped cold when he saw the bread cooling on the counter. "Who made that?" "I did. I'm Clara, the new cook." Big Jim looked at the bread, at Clara, back at the bread. "Can I, help yourself?" He cut a slice thick enough to choke a horse, ate it in 4 bites, and cut another. "You're staying, right? You're not leaving?" "Not planning on it." "Good. That's good." He finished the second slice and headed for the door, then turned back. "Thank you, ma'am. Been a long time since anything in this kitchen smelled like caring." Clara spent the afternoon learning the stove's temperament and the oven's hot spots. She made a venison roast with potatoes and carrots, biscuits again because the men had demolished the morning batch, and an apple cobbler from dried fruit that turned out better than expected. Dinner happened at 6, same chaos as breakfast, but louder. The men ate like soldiers and worked like machines, and somewhere during the meal, Clara realized she was smiling. Actually smiling. For the first time since her father died, she was doing something that mattered to people who appreciated it. The days that followed fell into rhythm. Wake before dawn, cook breakfast, clean, prepare dinner, collapse into bed exhausted. The work was brutal, but it was honest. The men treated her with careful respect, not because Boone had ordered it, but because she fed them well and didn't complain and proved herself tougher than they'd expected. By the end of the first week, Clara knew everyone's names and preferences. Pete liked his eggs runny. Jimmy would eat anything but claimed her biscuits were better than his mother's, which he said quietly, like a confession. Big Jim could put away enough food for 3 normal humans and still ask for seconds. Hank might not eat breakfast, but he'd been known to steal fresh bread when he thought nobody was looking. And Boone. Boone ate whatever she made, never complained, never complimented, just cleaned his plate and went back to running a ranch through the worst winter in 5 years. Clara was kneading dough for the evening's bread when Jimmy burst through the kitchen door, snow dusting his shoulders and something close to panic in his eyes. Got riders coming up the valley, 3 of them. Clara's hand stilled. Who? Can't tell from this distance, but they're coming fast. Boone appeared in the doorway behind Jimmy, and the temperature in the room dropped about 10 degrees. Get the men to the barn, casual, no weapons showing, but keep them close. Jimmy nodded and disappeared. Boone looked at Clara. You know anyone who'd ride out here? No, unless... Her stomach twisted. Unless it's someone from town. If it's town business, they'd send the sheriff. 3 riders means something else. He checked the gun on his hip, adjusting it slightly. Stay inside, don't come out unless I call for you. He left before Clara could argue. She moved to the window, watching 3 horses emerge from the snowy landscape like ghosts taking solid form. They weren't hurrying now, just approaching at a steady walk. Confident. That was worse somehow than if they'd been rushing. The riders stopped in the yard. All 3 dismounted. From this angle, Clara couldn't see faces, just hats and heavy coats, and the shape of men who carried themselves like authority. Boone met them halfway between the house and the barn, his hands visible and empty. The conversation was too quiet for Clara to hear, but she watched body language instead. One rider doing most of the talking, Boone standing still as stone. Then something changed. The talking rider gestured sharply toward the house, and Boone's entire posture shifted into something dangerous. Clara's heart hammered. She knew, somehow, that this had everything to do with her. The conversation ended abruptly. The riders mounted up and left. Not hurrying, but not lingering either. Boone watched them go until they were dots in the distance, then turned and walked back to the house with the kind of careful control that meant violence was close to the surface. He came through the door and stopped when he saw Clara standing by the window. That was Sheriff Porter and 2 deputies. What did they want? You. The word hit like a fist. Clara grabbed the counter for balance. Why? Complaint filed by several prominent Red Hollow citizens. Claims you're living in immoral circumstances. Claims I've corrupted you. Claims they have a moral obligation to rescue you from a dangerous situation. His jaw worked. They wanted to take you back to town, put you in the care of respectable women until they can find appropriate placement for you. Placement, Clara's voice came out flat. Like I'm livestock. Like your property they misplaced. Boone crossed to the stove, poured himself coffee, with hands that weren't quite steady. I told them you're employed here legally, that you're of age and came willingly, that they've got no grounds to remove you. What did they say? That the law's on their side. That unmarried women living on bachelor ranches creates moral hazards. That they'll be back with proper paperwork. He drank half the coffee in one swallow. They gave us 3 days. The kitchen tilted. Clara sat down hard in the nearest chair. 3 days. Then what? They'd drag her back to Red Hollow? Put her in some boarding house run by the same women who'd humiliated her at the social? Find her appropriate placement working as a servant for families who'd spend years reminding her she should be grateful? I won't go back. The words came out stronger than she felt. I'll run. I'll go to Montana or California or... Oh, you'll freeze to death before you hit the territorial line. Boone set the cup down. Winter's got another month at least. No stage running in this weather. Railroads snowed in. You try to run alone, you'll die. Then what? Clara looked up at him, this hard man who'd given her shelter when she had nothing. Let them take me? Let Red Hollow win? Boone was quiet for a long moment, his pale eyes fixed on something Clara couldn't see. When he spoke, his voice was low and deliberate. There's one way to make this legal, one way to make it so they can't touch you. Clara's breath caught. She knew what he was going to say before he said it. We get married. The kitchen went silent except for the fire crackling and Clara's heart hammering against her ribs. That's insane, she whispered. That's practical. You're my wife. They've got no legal standing, can't remove a woman from her husband's property without cause. We barely know each other. Don't need to know each other. Need to stop Red Hollow from destroying you out of spite. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed. I'm not offering romance, Clara. I'm offering protection. Legal protection. You'd keep your room, keep cooking, keep the $40 a month. Nothing changes except the paper that says you belong here. Why would you do this? Clara stood up, her legs shaky. You could just let them take me. Find another cook. Why risk your reputation for… Oh, my reputation's already ruined, has been for 5 years. Something dark crossed his face. And I'm tired of watching Red Hollow crush people for sport. They did it to your father. They're trying to do it to you. I've got the means to stop them, so I will. Clara stared at him. This man she'd known for less than 2 weeks. This dangerous stranger everyone feared. He was offering her his name like a shield, asking for nothing in return except that she keep cooking meals that tasted like home. It was crazy. Reckless. The kind of decision that could ruin both their lives. But Red Hollow was coming in 3 days, and Clara had learned the hard way that towns didn't forgive girls for surviving. If we do this, she said slowly, it's business, nothing more. Agreed. Separate rooms, separate lives, just protection. That's the deal. And if later you change your mind or you want… I won't. Boone's voice was flat. Lost my taste for that kind of complication years back. You'll be safe here, Clara. From the town and from me. That's the promise. Clara looked at this man who'd saved her twice now. Once at the social, once in the snow, and was offering to save her a third time in a way that would bind them together legally, but not emotionally. It should have felt wrong, should have felt like a trap. Instead, it felt like the only honest offer anyone had made her in 4 years. Okay, she said, let's get married. Boone nodded once, like they'd just agreed on a cattle price instead of a lifetime commitment. We'll ride to Copper Ridge tomorrow. Get the circuit judge to do the paperwork. Be back before dinner. The men? Should we tell them? They'll figure it out when you're wearing a ring. He pushed off from the counter. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. He left her alone in the kitchen with the bread dough still waiting to be shaped and the weight of the decision settling over her shoulders like snow. Clara finished the bread mechanically, her hands working while her mind spun. This was happening. She was marrying Boone Callahan, a man she barely knew, a man everyone feared, a man who'd looked at her elephant cookies and seen something worth protecting. That night, she lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow she'd become Mrs. Boone Callahan. Tomorrow she'd tie her life to a stranger's out of pure survival. Tomorrow Red Hollow would learn that the girl they threw away had found someone willing to fight for her. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something close to hope. Downstairs, Boone sat alone in his study with a bottle of whiskey he didn't open. He'd just proposed marriage to a woman he'd known for 10 days. A woman running from the same town that had taught him people were cruel and loyalty was rare and love was just another word for eventual betrayal. This wasn't love. This was strategy, protection, the logical solution to a legal problem. He almost believed it. The next morning came too fast. Clara dressed in her blue dress again, pinned her hair, and tried to stop her hands from shaking. Boone was already waiting with 2 horses saddled when she came outside. The ride to Copper Ridge took 3 hours through snow that had started falling again. They didn't talk. What was there to say? This was business, a transaction, 2 people helping each other survive in a world that wanted them broken. Copper Ridge was smaller than Red Hollow and didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was, a supply stop for ranchers and miners, with a general store, a saloon, and a courthouse that doubled as the judge's office. Judge Morrison was a grizzled old man who'd been marrying and divorcing frontier couples for 30 years. He looked at Boone and Clara, at their mismatched ages and tense postures, and sighed. This a shotgun wedding or a business arrangement? Business, Boone said. She of age? 24. Willingly entering this marriage? Clara found her voice. Yes. Judge Morrison pulled out the paperwork. I don't ask questions and I don't judge. But I will say this, marriage is legal binding. Can't undo it just because circumstances change. You're both clear on that? They nodded. Fine. Raise your right hands. The ceremony took 4 minutes. There were no witnesses except the judge's clerk. No flowers, no music, no promises of love and devotion, just words that turned Clara Whitmore into Clara Callahan with the scratch of a pen and 2 signatures on a legal document. Boone paid the fee. The judge handed over the marriage certificate. And just like that, it was done. They rode back in silence. The snow fell harder, erasing their tracks almost as fast as they made them. Clara kept touching the thin gold band Boone had produced from his pocket. His mother's, he'd said quietly. The only thing worth keeping from that life. It felt heavy on her finger. Real. Like a promise she hadn't quite meant to make. They arrived back at the ranch as the sun started setting. The hands were gathered in the yard, clearly waiting. Pete stepped forward first. Everything all right, boss? Boone dismounted, helped Clara down. Everything's fine. Claire and I got married today. Anyone has a problem with that can draw their pay and leave. The silence stretched. Then Jimmy let out a whoop that probably scared the horses. Hot damn! I mean, congratulations, ma'am. Boss. He grinned wide. This calls for celebration. This calls for dinner, Clara said, finding her balance. Which won't cook itself. She headed for the house before anyone could make it awkward. Behind her, she heard the men congratulating Boone in the rough way men did, all backslaps and crude jokes that didn't quite hide their genuine happiness. In the kitchen, Clara started dinner with hands that had stopped shaking. She was married to Boone Callahan. The town would lose their minds when they found out. Good. Let them lose their minds. Let them gossip and speculate and judge. She was legal now, protected. They couldn't touch her. Dinner that night felt different. The men kept glancing at her, then at Boone, like they were trying to figure out what had changed. But Clara cooked the same food, served the same portions, and refused to let anything feel strange. After the men cleared out, Boone appeared in the kitchen doorway. Thank you, he said quietly, for going through with it. Thank you for offering. They stood there awkwardly, this married couple who barely knew each other's history. Then Boone nodded and disappeared upstairs. Clara finished cleaning, checked the bread for tomorrow, and climbed to her own room. Still separate, still alone, but legal now, safe now. She fell asleep wearing a dead woman's ring and carrying a living man's name. 2 days later, Sheriff Porter returned with deputies and paperwork. Boone met them in the yard again, but this time Clara stood beside him. Porter looked at them both with something close to hatred. We're here to do nothing, Boone interrupted. Clara's my wife. Legal and binding. You want to see the marriage certificate? I've got it. You want to remove her from my property? You'll need grounds that don't exist. Porter's face went red. When did this? 2 days ago, Copper Ridge Courthouse. Judge Morrison officiated. Boone's voice was ice. She's Clara Callahan now. You've got no authority here. The sheriff looked at Clara, searching for some sign she'd been forced. She met his eyes steadily and said nothing. Finally, Porter turned his horse. Red Hollow's going to hear about this. Good, Boone said. Make sure they hear it right. Clara Whitmore's dead. Clara Callahan belongs here. They rode away cursing. Clara watched them go and felt something tight in her chest finally loosen. That night, the whole ranch celebrated with extra food and stories around the fire. The men treated Clara different now, not just with respect, but with the protective loyalty they showed Boone. She was one of them. Family. For the first time since her father died, Clara felt like she belonged somewhere. It wouldn't last. Red Hollow was coming. But tonight, Clara Callahan was safe, fed, and married to a man who'd fight the world before letting it destroy her. That was enough. The news reached Red Hollow within 24 hours, carried by Sheriff Porter like a disease he couldn't wait to spread. Clara heard about it from Jimmy, who'd ridden into town for supplies and come back with his face tight and his jaw set. They're calling you names I won't repeat in front of a lady, he said, unloading flour sacks in the kitchen. Mrs. Thornhill's saying you seduced the boss for his money. Your stepmother's telling anyone who'll listen that you were always headed for ruin. The whole town's working themselves into a state. Clara kept kneading bread, her hands steady even though her stomach churned. Let them talk. It ain't just talk, ma'am. They're saying things, legal things, about the marriage being invalid because you were coerced, about getting territorial authorities involved. I wasn't coerced. I know that. Boss knows that. But Red Hollow don't care about truth when lies are more entertaining. Jimmy set the last sack down harder than necessary. You watch yourself if you ever go back to that town. They're working up to something mean. Clara had no intention of going back to Red Hollow. The ranch had become her world. The kitchen, the men, the endless snow, and the strange new rhythm of being married to a man she slept 3 doors away from and barely spoke to outside of meal planning. 3 weeks passed. The winter deepened. Clara cooked and the men worked, and Boone ran the ranch with the focused intensity of someone using labor to avoid thinking about complicated things. They were polite to each other, careful, like 2 people sharing a house but not a life. Then one morning in late January, Clara woke to voices downstairs. Angry voices. She dressed quickly and found Boone in the kitchen with Pete and Big Jim, all 3 of them looking at a piece of paper like it might bite. What's wrong? Boone looked up. His face was carved from stone. Town council's filed a formal complaint with the territorial judge. They're claiming our marriage violates moral decency laws, requesting an annulment hearing. The bread dough Clara had been planning to start slipped from her mind. Can they do that? They can request anything. Whether the judge agrees is different. He set the paper down. Hearings in 2 weeks. Copper Ridge Courthouse. We'll both need to testify. Testify to what? That we got married legally? That the marriage is legitimate? That you weren't coerced or tricked? That we're actually living as husband and wife, not just using marriage as a legal loophole? He met her eyes. They're going to ask personal questions, Clara, about our relationship, our living arrangements, everything. Heat climbed her neck. We agreed this was business. And now we have to convince a judge it's not, or they'll tear the marriage apart and drag you back to Red Hollow for proper supervision. Boone's voice was flat, but his hands were fists. I'm sorry. I thought the certificate would be enough. I was wrong. Pete cleared his throat. Maybe if you 2 actually, acted married for appearances. We are married, Clara said. On paper, but you sleep in separate rooms. Boss calls you Clara, you call him Boone. You work in the kitchen, he works the ranch, and y'all barely cross paths except at meals. Pete looked uncomfortable but determined. I ain't suggesting anything improper, just saying if the judge sends investigators out here, they're going to notice you 2 live like polite strangers, not husband and wife. The kitchen went quiet. Clara's mind raced. Pete was right. Anyone watching them for 5 minutes would see the truth. This was a marriage of convenience, nothing more. And if the territorial judge decided it was fraudulent, they'd annul it, and Clara would lose the only legal protection she had. So what do we do? She asked quietly. Boone was silent for a long moment. Then, we make it look real, starting now. Over the next 3 days, things at the ranch shifted in small, uncomfortable ways. Boone moved some of his belongings into Clara's room. Not many, just enough that if someone searched the house, they'd find evidence of a shared space. Clara started taking meals with him at the small table in his study instead of eating alone in the kitchen. They made a point of sitting together in the evenings, both reading silently but visibly in the same room. It felt like play acting, like they were children pretending to be adults who knew how marriage worked. The men noticed but said nothing. They just watched with a mix of curiosity and concern, like they couldn't decide if this was helping or making things worse. A week before the hearing, Clara was teaching Boone how to crack eggs without getting shell everywhere. He'd insisted on learning, said it would look better if he could do basic cooking tasks, when he finally said what had been hanging between them. This isn't fair to you. Clara kept her eyes on the eggs. What part? All of it. The marriage, the hearing, having to pretend we're something we're not, just so a town full of hypocrites will leave you alone. He cracked an egg too hard and shell went everywhere. You should be married to someone someone you chose. Not this. I did choose this. When you offered, I said yes. You said yes because you were desperate and I was the only option. He wiped egg off his hands, frustrated. That's not choosing. That's surviving. Clara set her whisk down and looked at him directly. You're right. I was desperate, and you were the only option. But I've been here 6 weeks now, and you've never once made me regret saying yes. You've been decent and fair, and you've kept every promise you made." She paused. "Most men wouldn't. Most men would have expected things in return. But you just let me cook and sleep in peace, and you're paying me money I actually earned. So no, it's not a love match. But it's not unfair either." Boone met her eyes, something complicated moving across his face. "You deserve better than not unfair." "Maybe. But right now, not unfair is the best I've got, and I'll fight to keep it." The conversation ended there, but something had shifted. That night, when they sat reading in the study, Clara with her father's old recipe book, Boone with ranch ledgers, the silence felt less awkward, more like two people coexisting because they'd chosen to, not because circumstances forced them. The morning of the hearing, they rode to Copper Ridge together through snow that had finally stopped falling. The sky hung gray and heavy. Clara wore her blue dress and the gold ring that was starting to feel less strange on her finger. Boone wore his good coat and a tie that looked like it was strangling him. The courthouse was packed. Apparently, a marriage annulment hearing involving Red Hollow's most scandalous recent event was entertainment enough to draw a crowd. Clara recognized faces from the Christmas social: Patricia Thornhill in the front row, Evelyn sitting beside her looking pleased with herself. Sheriff Porter stood near the judge's bench like a guard dog. Judge Morrison presided again, but this time his expression was grim. Beside him sat a younger man Clara didn't recognize, introduced as Territorial Judge Whitmore. No relation to her, apparently, just unfortunate coincidence. The hearing began with Red Hollow's lawyer, a thin man with a voice like a mosquito, laying out their case. The marriage was fraudulent. Clara Whitmore had been in a vulnerable state when Boone Callahan took advantage. She was living in sin disguised as matrimony. The whole arrangement violated community standards and territorial law regarding moral conduct. He made it sound sordid, disgusting, like Clara was a victim and Boone was a predator and the marriage was a crime against decency. Then it was their turn. Boone testified first, standing in the witness box with his hat in his hands, speaking in that rough, quiet voice that somehow carried authority. "I married Clara because I wanted to. She's a good woman who is being persecuted by a town that should have protected her. I offered her honest work and she took it. When Red Hollow tried to remove her illegally, I offered marriage to keep her safe. She accepted. Nothing fraudulent about it." "But you barely knew her," the lawyer pressed. "You'd met her once before offering employment. How does that constitute grounds for marriage?" "Knew her well enough to see she was decent and hardworking. Knew her well enough to recognize the town was trying to destroy her for no good reason. That was sufficient." "And the sleeping arrangements? You maintain separate bedrooms, do you not?" Boone's jaw tightened. "We did initially, no longer. It was a lie. Sort of. They'd moved some things around, but Clara still slept alone. But the lawyer didn't know that, and Boone delivered it with enough conviction that doubt flickered across the man's face. Then Clara took the stand, her hands gripping the wood rail to keep them from shaking. "Mrs. Callahan," the lawyer began, and the name still sounded foreign in Clara's ears. "Did Mr. Callahan coerce you into this marriage?" "No." "Did he offer you employment conditional on matrimony?" "No. He offered employment first. Marriage came later as protection from people who wanted to remove me from work. I was doing well." "You were living alone on a ranch with 13 unmarried men. Surely you can understand the town's concern about propriety." "I can understand them caring more about appearances than truth. I was employed as a cook. I did my job. The men treated me with respect. The only impropriety was Red Hollow's attempt to force me back into a situation where I had no safety and no future." The lawyer smiled like he'd caught her. "So you admit the marriage was purely for legal protection, not based on affection or genuine marital intent?" Clara looked at Boone, sitting in the front row with his weathered hands clasped and his pale eyes fixed on her. This man who'd saved her 3 times now. This stranger who'd become something more complicated than a stranger over 6 weeks of shared meals and awkward silences and small kindnesses neither of them acknowledged. "The marriage was for protection initially," she said carefully, "but affection and intent develop with time. We're building something together. It may not look like what Red Hollow thinks marriage should look like, but it's real, and it's ours." The hearing dragged on for 3 hours. Witnesses testified, Patricia Thornhill claiming Clara had seduced Boone at the Christmas social, which would have been impressive considering she'd barely spoken to him. Evelyn swearing Clara had always been manipulative and boy-crazy, which was such an obvious lie even the judge looked skeptical. Sheriff Porter describing the ranch as a den of iniquity based on absolutely no evidence. Then Pete took the stand, still wearing his work clothes because he'd ridden straight from the ranch. "Mrs. Callahan's the best cook we've had in 10 years, he said bluntly. "She works harder than most men I know. She's respectful and decent, and the boss treats her better than I've seen most husbands treat wives in polite society. This whole hearing's a waste of time." Jimmy testified next, younger and more nervous but equally firm. "They're good together, maybe not romantic-like, but solid. Like a team. Boss is happier since she arrived. We all are. That's what marriage should do, make people better. Theirs does." Big Jim simply said, "You annul this marriage. You're making a mistake. That woman belongs on our ranch. Boss knows it. We know it. Only people who don't know it are the ones who never bothered to see her as human." The territorial judge called a recess. Clara and Boone sat in a small side room while lawyers argued in chambers. Neither of them spoke. What was there to say? Their fate was being decided by men who didn't know them and a town that hated them. After 90 minutes, they were called back. The courtroom had thinned out. Apparently, legal deliberation was less entertaining than testimony. But Patricia and Evelyn remained, vultures waiting to see if the carcass was still twitching. Judge Whitmore cleared his throat. "This court has reviewed the evidence and testimony. While the circumstances of this marriage are unusual, unusual is not illegal. Miss Whitmore, Mrs. Callahan, was of legal age and sound mind when she entered this union. Mr. Callahan has demonstrated the means to support a wife and has not violated any laws in his conduct. The marriage was performed legally by a licensed judge and recorded properly with territorial authorities." Clara's heart hammered. She didn't dare look at Boone. "However," the judge continued, and Clara's stomach dropped, "the court does have concerns about the rushed nature of this union and the circumstances that prompted it. Therefore, we are ordering a 6-month review period. Mr. and Mrs. Callahan will remain legally married during this time. At the end of 6 months, this court will revisit the matter. If at that time the marriage appears to be a genuine union rather than a legal convenience, it will be recognized permanently. If not, annulment proceedings will resume." The gavel came down. The decision was made. 6 months. They had 6 months to prove their marriage was real or lose everything. Clara finally looked at Boone. His expression hadn't changed, but something in his eyes had. Relief mixed with resignation. They'd won. Sort of. For now. Outside the courthouse, Patricia Thornhill blocked their path to the horses. 6 months, she said sweetly. "I'll be watching. We all will. And when this sham falls apart, Clara, you'll be right back where you started. Alone and unwanted." Boone stepped between them, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "You come near my wife again, Patricia, and you'll discover exactly how much tolerance I have left for Red Hollow's entertainment, which is none." He took Clara's arm, gently, but firm enough to make a point, and guided her to the horses. They mounted and rode away from Copper Ridge without looking back. The ride home was silent for the first hour. Then Clara finally found her voice. 6 months isn't long. Long enough. To convince them we're really married, they're looking for proof we're not. Boone was quiet for a long moment. "Then we give them proof. Whatever they need to see, we make sure they see it." "Like what?" He didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was careful. "Like actually being married. Not pretending. Not separate lives under one roof. Actually sharing a life." Clara's breath caught. "You mean—" "I mean, we eat together, sit together, ride together when work allows. I mean, we stop treating this like a business arrangement and start treating it like what we told the judge it was, a real marriage, minus the parts we agreed weren't included. That's still pretending? Maybe at first, but if we do it long enough, it stops being pretend and just becomes how we live." He glanced at her. "Unless you'd rather go back to Red Hollow in 6 months. I'd rather die. Then we make this work." They arrived at the ranch after dark. The men were waiting in the yard, clearly anxious. Pete stepped forward. "Well?" 6-month review, Boone said, dismounting. "Marriage stands for now. Court revisits in June." Relief rippled through the group. Jimmy whooped. Big Jim cracked the first smile Clara had seen from him. Even Hank looked pleased. which for Hank was significant. That night, dinner felt different. The men were louder, more celebratory. They toasted with coffee since nobody kept alcohol on the ranch. Boone's rule, one Clara suspected, had a painful history behind it. They told stories and laughed and treated Clara and Boone like actual newlyweds instead of business partners who happened to share a last name. After the men cleared out, Clara started washing dishes and Boone appeared with a towel, like always. They'd fallen into this routine weeks ago, her washing, him drying, both pretending it wasn't domestic and comfortable. "Thank you," Clara said quietly, "for today, for all of it." "Don't thank me yet. We've still got 6 months of scrutiny ahead. Red Hollow's not done." "I know, but still." She handed him a plate. "You didn't have to fight for me. You could have let them annul it and found a new cook, but you fought." Boone dried the plate carefully. "You're not just a cook, you're—" He stopped, started again. "This ranch runs better with you here. The men are happier, the food's better, and maybe it's better for me too, having someone around who isn't afraid of me." Clara looked at him, really looked. This hard man with his scars and his careful control and his determination to protect someone he barely knew from a town that wanted her broken. He wasn't handsome in any conventional sense, too weathered, too rough, too marked by violence and hard living. But standing in the lamplight drying dishes, he looked solid, real, like someone who kept promises even when keeping them was difficult. "I'm a little afraid of you," Clara admitted. "That's smart. I've done things you shouldn't know about. But I'm more afraid of them. Red Hollow. People who smile while they destroy you. You might be dangerous, but at least you're honest about it." Something that might have been a smile crossed Boone's face. "Honest and dangerous. That should be on my gravestone." They finished the dishes in companionable silence. When Clara headed upstairs, Boone followed. They'd agreed to maintain the appearance of a shared room even when alone. He settled into the chair by the window with ranch ledgers while Clara prepared for bed behind a privacy screen they'd set up. This was their compromise. Same room, maintained boundaries. Close enough for appearances, distant enough for comfort. Clara climbed into bed and blew out her lamp. Across the room, Boone's reading light still glowed. She could hear him turning pages, scratching notes with a pencil. Ordinary sounds, domestic sounds. The sounds of marriage, even if this marriage was stranger than most. She fell asleep listening to him work, and for the first time since her father died, Clara felt something close to peace. But peace never lasted long on the frontier. 2 weeks later, Jimmy rode in from town with news that made Boone's face go white. "Red Hollow's sending investigators," Jimmy said, breathless from riding hard. "Official ones, from the territorial government. They're coming next week to verify your living situation." Clara's stomach twisted. "They can do that?" "Judge Whitmore authorized it. Part of the 6-month review." Jimmy looked miserable. "I heard it from the postal clerk. They're sending 2 investigators to stay at the ranch for 3 days. They'll observe everything, interview everyone, report back to the court." Boone's jaw worked. 3 days, starting next Monday. That gave them 4 days to prepare. 4 days to transform their careful arrangement into something that looked like a real marriage. 4 days to learn how to be husband and wife instead of 2 people sharing space and last names. That night, Boone called a house meeting. All 12 men gathered in the main room, sensing the seriousness. "Investigators are coming Monday," Boone said without preamble. "They'll be watching everything, how Claire and I interact, how you all treat her, whether this looks like a real marriage or a legal dodge. We need to make damn sure they see a real marriage." "What do you need from us, boss?" Pete asked. "Natural behavior. Don't treat Clara any different than you would any rancher's wife. Don't make jokes about the situation. Don't slip and call it an arrangement or a deal. As far as anyone's concerned, we're married because we wanted to be, and we're building a life together." The men nodded, understanding. They'd already proven their loyalty. Now they needed to prove their acting skills. Over the next 4 days, Clara and Boone practiced being married. They took meals together at the main table instead of separately. They sat close during evening reading time. Boone taught Clara to ride properly instead of just clinging to his back. She was terrible at it, but the effort looked genuine. Clara taught Boone more cooking basics, which he was also terrible at but tried anyway. They learned each other's habits. Boone took coffee black with 2 sugars. Clara couldn't sleep if her window wasn't cracked open, even in winter. Boone read before bed. Clara hummed while cooking, Small things, personal things, the things actual married couples knew about each other. The hardest part was the casual affection, the hand on the small of her back when they walked, the way he pulled out her chair at meals, the brief touches that married people exchanged without thinking. It felt awkward at first, performative, but Boone was patient, and Clara was determined, and by Sunday night, they could almost pass for a couple who'd been together longer than 2 months. The investigators arrived Monday at noon. A severe woman named Mrs. Crawford and a younger man introduced as Mr. Simmons. Both carried notebooks and the kind of expressions that suggested they'd already decided the marriage was fraudulent and were just here to document proof. Clara served them lunch and tried to keep her hands from shaking. Boone sat beside her at the table, close enough that their arms nearly touched, and made polite conversation about weather and cattle prices, while Mrs. Crawford watched them like a hawk studying mice. After lunch, the investigators split up. Mrs. Crawford interviewed Clara in the kitchen while Mr. Simmons walked the property with Boone. The questions came rapid fire. How did they meet? At the Christmas social? When did they decide to marry? After Clara started working at the ranch and Red Hollow attempted illegal removal, where did they sleep? Same room. Did Mr. Callahan treat her well? Very well. Did she feel safe? Safer than she'd ever felt in Red Hollow. Did she love him? Clara hesitated on that one. Love was never part of the agreement. But Mrs. Crawford watched with sharp eyes, waiting for Clara to stumble. I care for him deeply, Clara said carefully. Love grows with time. We're building it together. Mrs. Crawford made a note. And the physical aspect of marriage, is that being fulfilled? Heat climbed Clara's neck. That's private. I'm afraid privacy is not a luxury afforded during official investigations, Mrs. Callahan. The court needs to establish whether this marriage is being consummated. Clara met the woman's eyes steadily. My husband and I share a bed and a life. What happens in that bed is between us and nobody else's concern. It wasn't exactly a lie. They did share a bed. Clara slept in it. Boone slept in the chair most nights. But Mrs. Crawford didn't need to know that. The interrogation continued for 2 hours. By the time Mrs. Crawford finished, Clara felt wrung out and defensive. She made dinner with shaking hands, hyper-aware that both investigators watched her every move. Boone appeared in the kitchen while she worked, moving close enough that his presence was undeniable. You all right? Fine, just tired. His hand found the small of her back, warm through her dress. The touch was for show. The investigators were watching from the doorway. But it steadied her anyway. You're doing good. Just keep being yourself. Dinner was tense. The hands ate quietly, clearly uncomfortable with strangers evaluating everything. Mrs. Crawford asked pointed questions about the ranch operations and Clara's role. Mr. Simmons watched Boone and Clara's interactions with disturbing focus. When the meal ended and the hands cleared out, Boone stood and offered Clara his hand. Walk with me? It was performance, Clara knew. But she took his hand anyway and let him lead her outside into the cold evening. They walked toward the corrals where the investigators couldn't hear, their breath steaming in the frozen air. They think we're lying, Clara whispered. Probably, but thinking's not proof. Boone kept his hand in hers, warm, calloused, solid. We just have to make it through 3 days, that's all. And if we can't convince them, then we fight harder. But we're not losing this, Clara. I promise you that. They stood together watching the horses move restlessly in the corral, and Clara realized with sudden clarity that somewhere over the past 8 weeks, this had stopped being just protection and started being something else. Something neither of them had names for, but both recognized. She was married to Boone Callahan, and against all odds, she was starting to care whether that marriage survived. The 3 days crawled by like wounded animals. Mrs. Crawford and Mr. Simmons observed everything with the cold efficiency of people trained to find fraud. They watched Clara cook breakfast, noted how Boone poured her coffee without asking how she took it. They sat through dinner conversations, timing the silences and measuring the distances between chairs. They interviewed each ranch hand separately, asking the same questions in different ways, hunting for contradictions. On the second night, Clara broke a plate. Just dropped it straight onto the floor where it shattered into a dozen pieces, her hands shaking too hard to hold anything. She stood there staring at the shards while her vision blurred and her breathing went shallow. Boone appeared in the doorway within seconds. He took one look at her face and dismissed the investigators who'd been lingering nearby with a tone that didn't invite argument. Out, both of you, now. They left, Boone crossed to Clara, careful not to step on the broken porcelain. "Hey, look at me." Clara couldn't. She was crying now, silently, furiously, hating herself for breaking in front of him. "I'm sorry, I can't." "You don't have to apologize." His voice was gentle in a way she hadn't heard before. "This is my fault. I should have told them to leave yesterday." "They're just doing their job. Their job is destroying people's lives based on paperwork and judgment. I'm done letting them do it to you." He moved closer, not touching, but present. "Breathe, Clara. Come on, in and out, nice and slow." She tried, failed, tried again. Her chest was too tight and her thoughts were spiraling. They were going to fail this investigation. The marriage would be annulled. Red Hollow would win. She'd end up right back where she started, alone, unwanted, thrown away like garbage. "I can't go back there," she whispered. "I can't. I'd rather—" "You're not going back. I told you that, and I meant it." Boone's hand found her shoulder, steady and warm. "We're getting through this. One more day. That's all we need. What if it's not enough? Then we fight harder. But you're not facing this alone, Clara. You're not facing anything alone anymore. That's what the marriage means, business arrangement or not. You're mine to protect, and I'm not giving that up." Something in his words cut through the panic. Clara's breathing steadied, the shaking in her hands eased. She looked at him finally, this hard man with scars and secrets who'd promised her safety and kept delivering it even when delivering it was difficult. "I'm sorry I'm making this harder," she said. "You're surviving people who want you broken. That's not making anything harder. That's being brave." He squeezed her shoulder once, then stepped back. "Go upstairs, get some rest. I'll clean this up and deal with the investigators." "Boone, go. That's not a suggestion." Clara went. She heard him explaining to Mrs. Crawford and Mr. Simmons that his wife was exhausted from their intrusion and needed privacy. Heard Mrs. Crawford protest that they had more questions. Heard Boone's response, quiet and deadly. "Then ask them tomorrow. Tonight, you leave her alone." Clara fell asleep listening to Boone's boots on the stairs, solid and reliable, and woke to dawn light and the smell of someone burning breakfast. She found Boone in the kitchen, surrounded by smoke and ruined eggs, looking murderous. The investigators sat at the table watching with barely concealed amusement. "What happened?" Clara asked. "Tried to make breakfast. Failed spectacularly." Boone scraped charred eggs into the trash. "You're not the only one who can break things, apparently." It was so unexpected, this competent, dangerous man defeated by eggs, that Clara almost laughed. She moved to the stove, assessing the damage. "Step aside, let me show you how it's done." They cooked breakfast together, Clara directing while Boone followed orders with exaggerated obedience that made Jimmy snicker when he came in to grab coffee. It was performance, mostly, but underneath the show was something real. Two people learning to work together, to compensate for each other's weaknesses, to build something functional from their combined efforts. Mrs. Crawford made notes. Mr. Simmons watched with narrowed eyes. But for the first time since they'd arrived, Clara didn't care what they thought. She was cooking with her husband in her kitchen on a ranch, and Red Hollow could choke on their judgment. That afternoon, the investigators requested a private meeting with Boone. He came back an hour later looking like he'd been through a war. "They want to speak with you," he said quietly. "Alone. No coaching, no preparation. Final interview." Clara's stomach dropped, but she nodded. She found Mrs. Crawford waiting in the study, Mr. Simmons standing by the window like a guard. "Mrs. Callahan, please sit." Clara sat, her hands folded in her lap. The gold ring caught light. Mrs. Crawford studied her for a long moment. "I'm going to be direct with you. This investigation exists because Red Hollow believes your marriage is fraudulent. They've provided compelling evidence that you were coerced by circumstance, if not by force. The timeline is suspicious, the living arrangements were questionable, and frankly, the age difference and power imbalance suggest exploitation rather than genuine affection." "They're wrong," Clara said. "Are they? You went from homeless and desperate to married in less than 2 days. That doesn't raise concerns for you?" "It raised concerns. I had concerns. But Boone, Mr. Callahan, was honest about what he was offering. Protection, employment, safety. He didn't lie about his intentions or expect things he hadn't promised. That's more honesty than Red Hollow ever gave me. Honesty doesn't equal love. No, but it's a better foundation than the marriages I saw in Red Hollow." Women marrying men they couldn't stand because society demanded it. Men marrying women they didn't respect because they needed heirs. At least Boone and I started with mutual respect and built from there. Mrs. Crawford leaned forward. Built what, exactly? You sleep in the same room, but I notice he often sleeps in that chair by the window. You work in the kitchen while he works the ranch. You're polite to each other, but there's a distance. I've seen business partners with more intimacy than you two display. Clara's throat tightened. This was it. The moment where she either told the truth and lost everything, or lied and became exactly what Red Hollow accused her of being. She chose something in between. When I married Boone, I didn't love him. I barely knew him. The marriage was protection, like you said. She met Mrs. Crawford's eyes. But I've lived here for 2 months now. I've cooked his meals and learned his habits. I've watched him run this ranch fairly, treat his men with respect, and defend me when the entire territory wanted me gone. I've seen him gentle with horses and brutal with people who threaten what's his. I've learned that he doesn't sleep well, that he reads to quiet his mind, that he carries guilt about things he won't discuss. And somewhere in learning those things, I started caring whether he was happy, whether we could build something real from this strange beginning. That's not the love story Red Hollow expected, but it's mine, and it's real. And I'll be damned if I let them take it away because it doesn't look like what they think love should look like. The silence stretched. Mr. Simmons shifted by the window. Mrs. Crawford's expression was unreadable. Do you love him? She asked finally. Clara thought about Boone teaching her to ride even though she was terrible at it, about him drying dishes every night without being asked, about the way he'd stood between her and the sheriff, between her and Red Hollow, between her and every force that wanted her destroyed, about how her hands had stopped shaking when he promised she wasn't facing anything alone. I'm learning how, she said quietly, and he's learning how to let me. Mrs. Crawford closed her notebook. That will be all, Mrs. Callahan. Thank you for your honesty. Clara left the study with no idea whether she'd saved the marriage or condemned it. The investigators departed the next morning. Mrs. Crawford shook Boone's hand with neutral professionalism. Mr. Simmons looked disappointed, like he'd wanted to uncover scandal, and found only hard work and complicated people instead. The court will receive our report within 2 weeks, Mrs. Crawford said. Judge Whitmore will make his determination based on our findings. You'll be notified of the decision. Then they were gone, and the ranch fell into strange quiet. The hands went back to work. Clara went back to cooking. Boone went back to managing cattle and fence lines and all the 1,000 things that kept a ranch running through winter. But something had shifted between them. They still slept in the same room, Boone in the chair, Clara in the bed, but now they talked before sleeping. Small conversations about nothing important, ranch gossip, weather predictions, stories from their pasts, carefully edited. Clara learned that Boone's mother died when he was 12, that his father drank himself to death 5 years later, that Boone had built this ranch from nothing using money he'd earned through methods he wouldn't detail, that he'd been engaged once, years ago, to a woman who left him for someone richer and less dangerous. Boone learned that Clara's mother died in childbirth when Clara was 9, that her father had been a baker before the drinking started, that he'd taught Clara to cook as a way to spend time together, back when they were still people who could be happy, that after he died, Evelyn had treated Clara like a servant she hadn't hired and couldn't fire. They learned each other in increments, like people assembling a puzzle without the picture on the box. A week after the investigators left, Jimmy rode in from town with a newspaper. His face was grim. You need to see this, boss. The Red Hollow Gazette had dedicated half the front page to an editorial titled The Corruption of Rural Morality, a Case Study. It detailed Clara and Boone's marriage, painting it as everything from fraud to Stockholm Syndrome. It named Clara as a seductress who'd trapped a wealthy rancher, named Boone as a predator who'd exploited a vulnerable girl, suggested their relationship was being investigated for criminal misconduct, not just moral failing. It was vicious, detailed, and completely public. Clara read it twice, her hands steady even though her insides churned. They spelled my name wrong. Boone looked at her. That's what you're focusing on? They spelled Callahan with 1 L. If they're going to destroy my reputation, they could at least spell my married name correctly. She set the paper down. What do we do? Nothing. Nothing? They want a reaction. We give them one. We're feeding the story. We ignore it, It dies when something more interesting happens. Boone's jaw worked. I won't give Red Hollow the satisfaction of knowing they got to us. But they had gotten to them. That night, Pete rode in with news that several Red Hollow families had filed formal complaints with territorial authorities, claiming the ranch was operating as a brothel disguised as a cattle operation. It was absurd, baseless, and exactly the kind of attack that could tie them up in legal battles for months. They're trying to bury you in paperwork, Pete said, force you to spend money on lawyers instead of running the ranch, bleed you dry through bureaucracy. Clara felt rage building in her chest, not the hot kind that exploded, the cold kind that calculated and planned. She looked at Boone. I want to go to Red Hollow. Absolutely not. They're doing this because they think I'm hiding, because I ran and they're using my absence as proof I'm ashamed. If I show up, face them directly. They'll tear you apart in public. Maybe. Or maybe they'll realize I'm not the scared girl they threw away, that I have a husband willing to back me, that I'm not running anymore. Clara stood. I want to go to Red Hollow, and I want to make them see what they created. Boone studied her for a long moment. Then, if we do this, we do it right, not sneaking in like criminals. We ride in together, middle of the day, and we show them exactly what a married couple looks like. 3 days later, on a Saturday when Red Hollow would be at its busiest, Clara and Boone rode into town together. She wore her blue dress and the gold ring. He wore his good coat and the expression that made smart people step aside. The town noticed immediately. Conversation stopped. People stared. Clara kept her chin up and her hand steady on the reins as they rode down Main Street like they owned it. They stopped in front of the general store. Boone dismounted first, then helped Clara down with a hand on her waist that lingered just long enough to make a point. They walked into the store together, and the silence was so complete Clara could hear her own heartbeat. The shopkeeper, Mr. Morris, who'd known Clara since childhood, looked between them nervously. Mrs. Callahan, Boone said clearly, using her married name deliberately. We need supplies. Coffee, flour, salt, whatever else you'd like. Clara moved through the store selecting items while every eye followed her. She felt the weight of their judgment, their curiosity, their barely concealed hostility. But she also felt Boone behind her, solid and present, and the ranch hands who'd insisted on riding in as backup, waiting outside. At the counter, Patricia Thornhill appeared like a bad dream. She looked Clara up and down with undisguised contempt. So the rumors are true. You actually went through with this farce. The marriage is legal and recognized by territorial authorities, Clara said evenly. Hardly a farce. A desperate girl clinging to a dangerous man for security. It's tragic, really. What's tragic, Boone said, his voice cutting through the store like a blade, is a town so empty of real problems that it manufactures scandals to fill the void. My wife and I are here for supplies, not judgment. You have a comment worth making, Patricia. Now's the time. Patricia's face reddened, but she stayed silent. Nobody in Red Hollow was stupid enough to provoke Boone Callahan directly. They paid for their supplies and left. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Clara recognized faces from the Christmas social, from her childhood, from the years of whispers and sideways glances. Evelyn stood near the front, her expression sour. Clara stopped on the store steps and looked at them all. I know what you think of me, she said, her voice carrying across the street. You think I'm desperate, immoral, that I seduced a rancher for money or trapped him through manipulation. You've made your opinions very clear through newspapers and legal complaints and gossip. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. But here's the truth you don't want to hear. Boone Callahan gave me a job when you threw me into the snow. He offered me safety when you tried to drag me back for moral correction. He married me to protect me from a town that cares more about appearances than actual human beings. And in the process, we built something real, something honest, something better than most of the marriages I witnessed growing up in Red Hollow, where people marry for money and status and spend their lives making each other miserable. She paused, letting the words sink in. You want to judge me? Fine, judge away. But do it honestly. Don't pretend this is about morality or law or propriety. This is about a town that couldn't control me, so it decided to destroy me. And when destruction failed, you tried shame. When shame failed, you tried legal action. You're not protecting anything. You're just proving that cruelty is your primary export. Silence. Then Evelyn stepped forward, her voice shrill. "You ungrateful girl. After everything I did for you, you threw me out on Christmas Day," Clara said flatly. "The only thing you did for me was teach me what family shouldn't look like." Evelyn's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Patricia looked murderous, but nobody spoke. Nobody had a response because Clara had said out loud what they all knew was true. Boone's hand found her elbow. "We're done here." They mounted their horses and rode out of Red Hollow with 12 ranch hands flanking them like an honor guard. Clara didn't look back. She'd said what needed saying. Whether it changed anything remained to be seen. That night, the ranch felt different, quieter, like the confrontation had released pressure that had been building for months. Clara cooked dinner and the men ate with more enthusiasm than usual, treating the Red Hollow trip like a military victory. After the hands cleared out, Boone found Clara in the kitchen. "You were brave today, braver than you needed to be." "I was tired of running, tired of letting them control the narrative." "Think it'll change anything?" "Probably not, but at least they know I'm not scared anymore." Clara dried the last plate. "And they know I've got someone willing to stand with me. That counts for something." Boone was quiet for a moment, then, "The investigator's report came back today. Jimmy picked it up from the courthouse." Clara's heart stopped. "And?" "They recommended the marriage be recognized as legitimate. Judge Whitmore signed off this afternoon. We're legally married with no further review required." The relief hit Clara like a physical force. She grabbed the counter for balance. "We won?" "We won." Something that might have been a smile crossed Boone's face. "Red Hollow can file all the complaints they want. Won't change the legal status." Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she was smiling, actually smiling. "We did it." "You did it. That speech today probably helped. Showed the judge you weren't being coerced or manipulated, that you were choosing this life actively." "I was. I am." Clara looked at him, this man who'd become her husband in ways neither of them had planned. "Thank you for everything. For taking a chance on some desperate girl with cookie recipes. Those cookies saved my life, turns out. Got me a wife who cooks better than anyone in 3 territories and isn't afraid to tell an entire town to go to hell." Boone's expression softened. "I'm the one who should be thanking you, Clara. You made this place feel like more than just a ranch. Made it feel like home?" He nodded. "Yeah, home." They stood in the kitchen, their kitchen, and something shifted, something neither could name but both recognized. The distance that had marked their marriage from the beginning was still there, but it was smaller now. More deliberate. Less about fear and more about respect for boundaries they'd both needed. Clara didn't know what came next. Didn't know if this strange marriage would ever become conventional. But standing there with Boone in the lamplight, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was exactly where she belonged. Red Hollow had tried to destroy her. Instead, they'd driven her into the arms of a man who fought for her, who protected her, who valued her enough to change both their lives forever. The town that mocked her father's cookies had learned an important lesson. Sometimes the girl you throw away finds someone who sees her worth. And sometimes that someone has the power to make you regret every cruel choice you ever made. Clara fell asleep that night in her own bed, in her own room, in her own home, wearing a gold ring that meant more now than it had on the day she'd accepted it. And across the room, Boone sat in his chair reading, but his eyes kept drifting to the woman who'd crashed into his carefully controlled life and refused to be afraid. They were married. Actually married. Not in the way Red Hollow understood marriage, but in a way that worked for them, and that was enough. Spring came late that year, fighting its way through snowdrifts that refused to surrender. By March, the ranch was still half frozen, but the worst of winter had broken. Clara watched from the kitchen window as the hands worked to repair fence lines damaged by months of ice and wind. Boone was out there with them, his coat finally shed now that temperatures had climbed above freezing. 4 months since the marriage became legally permanent. 4 months of living as husband and wife in the strange way they'd defined it. Close, but not intimate. Partners, but not lovers. Building something neither could quite name. The knock on the door came during breakfast preparation. Clara wiped her hands and found a young woman standing on the porch. Maybe 19, with a black eye and a carpet bag that looked like it held everything she owned. "I heard you take people in," the girl said quietly. People with nowhere else to go. Clara looked at her. At the bruises, the desperate eyes, the way she held herself like someone expecting to be hit. She'd worn that same posture once. "Come inside," Clara said. "You look half frozen." The girl's name was Annie. Her husband had beaten her for 2 years before she'd finally run. She'd walked 12 miles through melting snow to reach the ranch because someone in Copper Ridge told her that Mrs. Callahan helped women who needed shelter. Clara fed her breakfast and showed her to the spare room, the one Clara had slept in when she first arrived. Annie cried when she saw the bed, like she couldn't believe shelter could be this simple. By the time Boone came in for lunch, Clara had made a decision. "We're keeping her," she said without preamble. "Annie, she's staying." Boone looked at the closed bedroom door upstairs, then at Clara. "She running from someone?" "A husband who uses her as a punching bag." His jaw tightened. "He know where she went?" "Probably not, but he'll look. Then we make sure he doesn't find her." Boone grabbed coffee, thinking. "She can help you in the kitchen. Between you and the hands, she'll have protection. Anyone comes asking, we've never heard of her." It was that simple, that uncomplicated. A girl needed help, so they helped her. Annie wasn't the last. Word spread through the frontier like wildfire carried on desperate wind. The Callahan Ranch took people in. Women escaping violence, families who'd lost everything to bad weather or worse luck, drifters who needed work and a place to sleep. Anyone Red Hollow or towns like it had decided wasn't worth protecting. By May, the ranch had transformed. The bunkhouse expanded to accommodate 3 more hands. 2 widows lived in the main house, helping Clara with cooking and cleaning in exchange for safety. A family of 5 occupied the old storage building, converted into living quarters after their farm burned down. Annie had stopped flinching every time someone moved too fast. The ranch operated like a small community now instead of just a cattle operation. Children played in the yard. Women gathered in the kitchen sharing recipes and stories. The men worked harder than ever because they understood they weren't just protecting cattle anymore. They were protecting a refuge. Clara stood at the center of it all, cooking meals for 20 people some nights, teaching women to defend themselves with kitchen knives, settling disputes between children, and somehow keeping the chaos organized enough that everyone ate and slept and felt safe. Boone watched her work with something close to awe. This woman who'd arrived broken and scared had built a sanctuary without even realizing it. One evening in late May, after the kitchen finally emptied and the house settled into quiet, Boone found Clara sitting on the porch steps looking exhausted. "You need help," he said, sitting beside her. "This is too much for one person." "I'm managing." "You're drowning. I can see it." He kept his voice gentle. "We need to hire more help. Maybe build another structure for families, organize this better before it collapses." Clara was quiet for a moment. "I never meant for it to become this big. I just kept saying yes when people asked for help." "Because you remember what it's like when everyone says no." Boone's shoulder brushed hers. "But you can't save everyone, Clara. You'll kill yourself trying." "Then what do I do? Turn people away? Become Red Hollow?" "You build systems that work. You teach people to help themselves instead of just helping them. You create something sustainable." He paused. "And you let me actually be your partner in this instead of just the man who signs the bank drafts." Clara looked at him. Really looked. Over the past 5 months, Boone had changed in small ways. He smiled more, laughed occasionally at Jimmy's terrible jokes, spent evenings reading in the kitchen instead of isolating in his study. He'd become part of the community Clara was building instead of just the man who owned the land it sat on. "I don't know how to share this," Clara admitted. "I've never built anything worth protecting before. I'm terrified if I let go for even a second, it'll all fall apart." "Then we'll hold it together, both of us." Boone's hand found hers on the step between them. That's what marriage is supposed to be. 2 people building something neither could build alone. Clara's breath caught. They'd been married 6 months. And this was the first time either of them had acknowledged that their partnership might actually resemble the thing they'd claimed it was. "We're not a normal marriage," she said quietly. "No, but we're an honest one. That counts for more." The next morning, they started reorganizing. Boone hired 2 women from Copper Ridge to help with cooking and childcare. He drew up plans for a second bunkhouse and a communal dining hall. Pete took over managing the work crews while Jimmy coordinated supply runs. Clara taught the widows and Annie how to handle ranch finances and food inventory, distributing responsibility instead of carrying it all herself. Within 3 weeks, the ranch ran smoother than it ever had. Clara could breathe again, and in the breathing space, she noticed things she'd been too exhausted to see before, like how Boone had started sleeping in the bed instead of the chair, how he'd moved from his side to the middle, leaving Clara her space but claiming his own, how they'd wake up, sometimes facing each other, close enough that their breath mingled in the dawn light, like how the casual touches had become less performative. His hand on her back wasn't for show anymore. It was just where his hand went. Her fingers brushing his when passing coffee wasn't accidental. It was intentional. Like how they'd started finishing each other's sentences and anticipating each other's needs and moving around the kitchen in synchronized rhythm that came from months of learning each other's patterns. It was late June when everything changed. Clara was teaching Annie how to make elephant cookies, her father's recipe, the one that started this whole strange journey, when riders appeared on the horizon. Not just any riders, Red Hollow riders. She recognized Sheriff Porter's horse, and beside him, dressed in expensive traveling clothes, rode Patricia Thornhill and 3 other town council members. Boone appeared from the barn, his expression already dark. "Stay inside."
No? No.
Clara wiped flour from her hands. "Whatever they want, we face it together." The riders stopped in the yard. Porter dismounted slowly, taking in the expanded ranch, the children playing, the women working in the garden, the obvious signs of a thriving community. "Mr. Callahan, Mrs. Callahan." He tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "We need to have a conversation." "Then talk," Boone said. Patricia stepped forward, her face pinched. "We've received complaints from multiple sources about the activities at this ranch. Rumors of harboring fugitives, operating without proper permits, and creating a settlement that violates territorial land use regulations." "Rumors?" Clara repeated. "From who? That's confidential, but the complaints are serious enough that we're required to investigate." Patricia's smile was poison. "We'll need to interview your residents, inspect your facilities, and verify you're operating legally." Boone's hand moved to his gun belt in a gesture so casual it was almost invisible. Almost. "You've got no authority here. This is private property, and we're not violating any laws." "That remains to be determined." Porter pulled out an official-looking document. "Territorial order signed by Judge Whitmore. We're authorized to conduct a full investigation of this property and its inhabitants." Clara felt rage building in her chest. This was Red Hollow's new strategy. If they couldn't destroy her marriage, they'd destroy the refuge she'd built. They'd use bureaucracy and regulations and manufactured complaints to tear apart the one good thing she'd created. "Fine," she said, her voice cold. "Investigate. Interview whoever you want. Inspect every building. You won't find anything illegal because we're not doing anything wrong. We're just helping people Red Hollow threw away, same as you did to me." "We'll see about that." Patricia gestured to the council members. "Let's begin." The investigation took 3 days. They questioned every resident, demanding to know how they'd arrived, why they'd stayed, whether they felt coerced or threatened. They inspected buildings, counted heads, reviewed financial records. They were looking for violations the way vultures looked for corpses, desperate and determined. But they found nothing. Every resident was there willingly. Every structure met safety standards. The ranch operated within legal boundaries, even if it operated outside social norms. By the 3rd day, Sheriff Porter looked frustrated and Patricia looked murderous. Clara was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Patricia cornered her alone. "You think you've won," Patricia said quietly. "You think you've built something that makes you better than us. But you're just a scared girl playing house with a dangerous man's money." "I'm a woman who survived everything you tried to do to me," Clara corrected, "and built something better than anything Red Hollow ever offered." "Better? You've turned this ranch into a dumping ground for society's failures. Beaten women, desperate families, people too weak to survive on their own. People you decided weren't worth helping," Clara said. "And yes, I did build something better, because this place gives people second chances instead of crushing them for entertainment." Patricia stepped closer, her voice dropping. "You humiliated me at that Christmas social, made me look cruel in front of the entire town. I haven't forgotten that." "Good. Don't forget it. Remember it every time you see someone struggling and decide whether to help or hurt them. Remember that your cruelty drove me here, and my survival is your failure. Patricia's hand flew up, but Clara caught her wrist before the slap landed. They stood frozen, two women locked in a battle that had started with cookies and escalated into something much bigger. "Touch me again," Clara said quietly, "and my husband will make you regret it. Not because I'll ask him to, because that's who he is. A man who protects the people he values, something you wouldn't understand." She released Patricia's wrist and walked away, leaving the older woman trembling with rage in the kitchen. That night, the Red Hollow delegation left empty-handed. They'd found no violations, no illegalities, nothing they could use to shut down the ranch or destroy what Clara had built. Porter looked defeated. Patricia wouldn't meet Clara's eyes. As they rode away, Boone appeared beside Clara on the porch. "They'll be back," he said. "Red Hollow doesn't give up this easy. Let them come. Every time they try to destroy this place, we'll prove them wrong." Clara leaned against the porch railing. "I'm tired of being afraid of them, tired of letting their judgment control my life." "You haven't let them control anything in months. You've just been too busy building to notice." Clara looked at him. The evening light caught his face, softening the hard edges. 6 months ago, this man was a stranger offering shelter. Now he was what? Partner? Protector? Friend? Something more complicated that lived in the space between business arrangement and actual marriage. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for letting me turn your ranch into chaos." "It's not chaos. It's purpose." Boone's hand found hers on the railing, their fingers intertwining naturally. "And it's our ranch, not mine. Ours." The words settled between them like a promise. By August, the ranch had become something neither Clara nor Boone could have imagined. 32 people called it home now, some permanently, some temporarily, while they rebuilt their lives. The communal dining hall was finished, large enough to seat everyone at once. Children attended informal school taught by one of the widows who'd been a teacher before her husband died. The men had built a small chapel for those who wanted it, though attendance was optional and nobody preached about the moral failings of anyone present. It was a community built on one simple principle: everyone deserved a second chance, and nobody got judged for needing one. Clara's elephant cookies had become legendary. She baked them every Sunday, and children fought over who got the most. Travelers came from miles around just to taste them and hear the story of the girl who'd been mocked at a Christmas social and turned that mockery into a symbol of hope. One September evening, Clara and Boone sat together on the porch watching the sun set over the valley. It had become their routine, ending each day here in the quiet space between work and sleep, talking about nothing important and everything that mattered. "I've been thinking," Boone said carefully, "about us." Clara's heart skipped. "What about us?" "This marriage started as protection, a legal arrangement to keep Red Hollow from destroying you, and for a long time that's all it was." He turned to face her. "But it's not just that anymore, hasn't been for months." "No," Clara agreed quietly, "it hasn't. So I need to know, what do you want this to be? Because I can keep pretending we're just business partners if that's what you need, but I'm tired of pretending I don't." He stopped, searching for words. "I'm tired of pretending you're not the best thing that ever happened to this ranch, and to me." Clara's breath caught. 6 months of careful distance, of maintained boundaries, of respecting the agreement they'd made. And now Boone was offering to change the rules. "I'm scared," she admitted, "of changing what works, of wanting more and ruining what we have." "Me too, but I'm more scared of getting to the end of my life and realizing I had something real right in front of me and was too afraid to reach for it." Boone's hand found hers, calloused and warm. "I'm not asking for everything at once, Clara. Just asking if you're willing to try. To let this marriage become the real thing instead of the safe thing." Clara looked at this man who defended her, protected her, built a refuge with her, and never once demanded more than she was ready to give. She thought about the girl she'd been 6 months ago, desperate, scared, thrown away like garbage, and the woman she'd become, strong enough to build a community, brave enough to face down Red Hollow, confident enough to know her own worth. Boone had helped her become that woman, not by changing her, but by giving her space to grow. "I'm willing to try," she said, "if you're patient with me. If you understand I've never done this before, never had a relationship where someone actually valued me. I've got all the patience in the world." "And Clara?" He squeezed her hand. "I've never done this either. Not really. Every relationship I had before ended because I couldn't trust people to stay. But you've stayed. Through investigations and attacks and Red Hollow's worst efforts, you stayed and you built something beautiful here. That kind of loyalty, that's what changes a man. They sat in the gathering darkness, hands linked. Two people who'd entered marriage as strangers and found themselves becoming something neither expected. The kiss happened slowly, tentatively, like they were both testing whether this new version of them could work. It did. It worked in a way that felt inevitable and right, and like coming home to a place Clara hadn't known existed. That night, for the first time since their wedding, Boone and Clara shared their bed intentionally. Not because investigators were watching, not because appearances demanded it, but because they wanted to. Because the distance they'd maintained had served its purpose, and now they were ready for something closer. The autumn brought changes beyond their relationship. Red Hollow tried one more attack, a legal complaint about unlicensed educational facilities on the ranch. It failed spectacularly when Judge Whitmore visited personally, saw what they'd built, and dismissed the complaint with a lecture about wasting the court's time. After that, Red Hollow finally gave up. Patricia Thornhill stopped filing complaints. Evelyn stopped telling lies about Clara's character. The town accepted that Clara Callahan wasn't coming back to be broken and redirected their cruelty toward other targets. Clara should have felt victorious. Instead, she felt sad for them. Red Hollow would always be a town that destroyed people for entertainment because they'd never learned that building was harder than breaking, but infinitely more rewarding. By December, exactly 1 year after the Christmas social that changed everything, the ranch was preparing for its own celebration. Clara spent a week baking, not just elephant cookies, but every recipe her father had taught her. The dining hall was decorated with pine garlands the children had gathered. Every resident contributed something to the feast. The night before Christmas, Clara found Boone in his study, their study now, reviewing the year's accounts. "We made it," he said, looking up. "Financially, I mean. Between the cattle and the extra hands working, we're profitable enough to sustain everyone here. We can keep this going." "We will keep it going," Clara corrected, "for as long as people need it." Boone pulled her into his lap, something that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago but now felt natural. "You changed everything, you know that? This ranch, this life, me, all of it's better because you crashed into it with your elephant cookies and your refusal to stay broken. You changed everything too, gave me space to become someone I didn't know I could be." Clara wrapped her arms around his neck. "We're good at this, building things together." "We are." He kissed her softly. "Think we can keep doing it? For the next 50 years or so?" "I think we can try." The Christmas celebration the next day was nothing like the Red Hollow social. It was louder, messier, more chaotic. Children ran screaming through the dining hall. Someone spilled punch. Big Jim got into a friendly argument with Pete about who'd caught the biggest fish last summer. The widows sang carols that were slightly off-key but enthusiastic. Clara stood in the middle of it all, watching her strange, imperfect family celebrate, and felt tears burning behind her eyes. Happy tears. Grateful tears. Tears for the girl she'd been a year ago who thought her life was ending. Boone appeared beside her, sliding an arm around her waist. "You okay?" "Better than okay. I'm home." "Yeah, you are." He kissed her temple. "We both are." Someone called for the elephant cookies and Clara went to retrieve them. Dozens of perfect elephants, each one representing a second chance, a new beginning, a refusal to let cruelty win. She served them to people who appreciated them, who understood their meaning, who'd all, in their own ways, been thrown away by towns and families and circumstances and found refuge here. As she watched everyone eat and smile and celebrate, Clara understood something fundamental about survival. It wasn't about becoming hard or closed off or letting cruelty teach you to be cruel. It was about staying soft enough to help the next person who needed it, about building communities instead of walls, about proving that the people who threw you away were wrong about your worth. That night, after the celebration ended and the ranch settled into quiet, Clara and Boone lay in their bed, their shared bed now, and watched snow begin to fall outside the window. "Next year will be harder," Boone said quietly. "More people will come. More attacks from towns like Red Hollow. More challenges we can't predict." "I know. But we'll handle it, together." "Together," Clara agreed. She fell asleep in her husband's arms, her real husband now, not just on paper, and dreamed of elephants and cookies and a ranch that became a refuge because two broken people decided to build something better than the world that broke them. Red Hollow had tried to destroy her. Instead, they'd driven her into a life more meaningful than anything their careful cruelty could create. And somewhere in that frontier town, Patricia Thornhill probably still threw cookies in trash bins, and Evelyn still blamed others for her unhappiness, and the Christmas social still celebrated elegance over kindness. But none of it touched Clara anymore. She'd found her people, built her home, married her partner, and every Sunday she baked elephant cookies that children fought over and travelers crossed territories to taste. Because the girl everyone mocked had learned the most important lesson the frontier could teach. Sometimes the people who throw you away are doing you the biggest favor of your life. They're making space for you to find the ones who will fight to keep you. And that makes all the difference.